Good evening, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to a new video, I guess. Before we get into it, likes, comments, subscriptions always help. I greatly appreciate them, and I hope you enjoy today's content. By the way, down in the description is a link to my election model, which is right, I have the tab open here, and also a link to my Patreon. I would greatly appreciate any contributions there. Anyway, so the debate happened last night, and here we have an image of Chris Wallace interrupting the moderator of last night's debate. In all seriousness, that basically should tell you how the night went. The only people who won were those of us, those watching the debate, looking for an excuse to drink. I think those are the only people who won the debate. And here's why. I'm going to explain why I don't think Trump won and why I definitely don't think Biden won. Trump failed to win because he was too much of an asshole. At least that's how independents, undecideds, and media is going to portray it. Also, they're going to claim he was wrong on all the issues and all that stuff, but he wasn't one, and I'll get to that, okay? Because I took 25 pages of notes. That's how fast-paced this was, and that's actually one of the reasons why I think Trump overperformed slightly. At least in the classical sense. We all knew that he was going to make it a brawl, if that makes any sense. But Trump is actually surprisingly, he's not terrible at debating. I wouldn't call him a master debater. Definitely not a cunning linguist, but he has an instinct for how to frame a conversation or frame a debate, which is one of the ways you can actually win a debate. And we'll get to that in just a second. But we can often take away from a presidential election what happened in either the first debate or the most notable debate, or the overall tone of all three, or however many debates there were, at least in the modern era. For example, 1960, Richard Nixon versus JFK. People who watched it on television said Kennedy won. Those who listened to it on the radio said that Nixon had won. Now, I hope I don't have to tell you, well, I maybe do have to explain what the difference between television and radio is to some of my younger viewers. Basically, radio is something that you purely listen to. It's a podcast, okay? Except they used to have radio shows and all this stuff. Anyway, you get no visual cues, no visual aids, so you can only listen and think about what's going on. So when you listen to a debate on the radio, substance matters significantly more. It's pretty much the only thing that matters, substance and style. On television, however, whoever looks more photogenic is going to have a slight edge. You can win if you're not the most photogenic person on earth, but it's going to be more difficult if you're competing against somebody who is photogenic, telegenic. Okay, that's what we learned from that. Kennedy won narrowly, thus proving there's no need for substance in a debate, which is false, but it definitely slowly, I would say, actually hurt the debate process and the usefulness of presidential debates. Because, especially as time wore on, people just don't have the time or the interest or the attention span to listen to a 2-3 hour debate where each candidate actually dives into their policy goals, why they support what they believe, etc., instead of what we now have, which is a competition to get a soundbite in. And by the way, neither candidate really had anything that's going to wind up being a fantastic soundbite to the likes of what I'm about to get into. The next debate that I think most people would bring up, or that were going to be useful, is actually notable that the most memorable part of the debate is the losing candidate, the candidate who I think most people would say, even though the debate was a wash, probably didn't help his cause, especially with the fact that he wound up losing the election. And that was Ford versus Carter, and Ford's famous, "There is no Soviet presence in Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration," as Soviet tanks rolled through Eastern Europe. Yeah, kind of a bad look right there. 4 years later, however, you have the great communicator wipe the floor in his lone debate versus Carter. And that was, of course, Reagan, with his famous, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" And the "there you go again" line that he used against Carter. And here's the thing, Reagan was exceptionally skilled at debating, but in the more traditional sense. But he also could throw he could throw down when in a primary debate the moderator threatened to turn off Reagan's mic. Reagan simply said, "I am paying for this microphone," and the audience cheered, because of course they did. They cheered at anything Reagan said. Then in '84, you have the famous question asked by one of the moderators, "Are you too old to be president?" And Reagan said, "No. And let me add this, I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience," which was such a bombshell and such political dynamite that Walter Mondale said afterwards he knew at that moment he had lost. And there was still, a decent amount of time left before Election Day. That should tell you how bad that response was for Mondale and how great that was for Reagan. 4 years later, you have another case where the losing ticket winds up having the most memorable parts of the debate. The top of the ticket was Mike Dukakis responding very poorly to a very, in my opinion, inappropriate debate question regarding capital punishment. I don't think that was a very fair question to ask, and unfortunately, even though Dukakis called it out as being a very unfair question to ask, he answered it, which was the dumbest thing he could have possibly done. I'm not even going to repeat the question because it makes me feel dirty that it was even asked in a debate. That said, the vice presidential debate had the more memorable quote from that election, which was actually uttered by Texas Senator Lloyd Bentsen versus Indiana Senator Dan Quayle, where Dan Quayle said that he had as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he ran for president, in response to Dan Quayle being a little youthful for somebody looking to enter, the second highest office in the land. And Lloyd Benson was ready to pounce. He said, I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. You, sir, are no Jack Kennedy. I honestly believe that if that was the top of the ticket debate, for president, not vice president, Benson would have won the election. That's how dynamite I think that response was. Wow. That was. That could have changed a lot of things if that was for the presidency and not a vice presidential debate. Then we go to the 92 elections, where another weird one. You got two moments that are kind of memorable. One, Bill Clinton being empathetic Bill Clinton and, oh, I know how you feel. I want to help workers like you, and I want to make it better. And then, yeah, I didn't quite get nailed Clinton there, but you get what I'm trying to say, is that Clinton was empathetic and he spoke to the voters' minds, whereas H.W. Bush, he sounded a little bit too upper crust, if that makes any sense. But honestly, the thing that I think stood out the most when I rewatched those debates, because I wanted to see what I could pick up on what makes a good debate performance, especially as time has gone on. The thing that stood out to me was actually H. Ross Perot campaigning on something that would, in today's day and age, probably get him elected into office, and that's being anti-trade. And he said that if NAFTA was signed, there would be a great sucking sound of jobs going to Mexico. And this is actually a very similar message to what Donald Trump ran on in 2016, minus the, immigration thing and all that stuff. And Ross Perot went for this message with an intellectual bend, and he was actually surprisingly popular. I think that with his strong debate performance, as well as his general likability and people's willingness to listen to him and pay attention, and the fact he got, I think it was 20% of the vote, and that was including him dropping out completely during the election year, and having his numbers completely fall. There was actually a point where he was leading in the average polls nationally. I think if he had not dropped out, he probably would have maintained a very competitive footing with both Clinton and Bush. And with his strong debate performance, I think he would have at least won a few states. He probably would have thrown the election to the House, and that could have been interesting. In 96, no one remembers anything because Dole was kind of, I don't want to say uninspiring, but it felt like the GOP was more focused on Congress and the House than they were with regards to the presidency. They didn't really support Dole all that much anyway. In 2000, the most memorable thing I think anybody can remember is Al Gore sighing anytime George Bush said anything. 2004, I really personally don't remember anything. Oh yeah, the other Bush-Gore moment was Gore walked right up to George W. Bush, and W just went, gave a little nod and a grunt of acknowledgement, and then continued on with his answer. And I think that also helped tremendously make Bush seem a little bit more likable, a little bit more friendly, open, some stuff like that. 2008, again, I don't really remember too much about that one. I wasn't really paying attention, and even then, rewatching 04 and 08, I wasn't impressed with very much. Vice presidential debate, the only notable moment was "Say It Ain't So, Joe" from Sarah Palin. 2012, first debate, Romney kind of wiped the floor with Obama. And then, wow, I've been rambling for 15 minutes. Shit. 16, I think people more remember what Trump did, and that should tell you. Generally speaking, the more memorable the candidate, the more likely it is, and the more memorable the moment, the more likely it is that candidate won the election. And I think the only thing people are going to remember from this is Chris Wallace interrupting the moderator of the debate. So, because it's a Trump thing, future generations may say, oh, did Trump win in November? At first glance, thinking about how the debate went. But I'm going to try and get into figuring out, could we assign a winner? Well, if we're talking about force of personality, yeah, Trump kind of walked all over the whole thing and made it his own. Yeah. The word I would use to describe last night's debate was an unmitigated shit show. Anyway, now Trump tried to tie Biden to socialism. I'm still skeptical that is a winning play, but it's what the Trump campaign is doing, so okay. In addition, I think the Trump campaign would have much rather preferred to be going up against Bernie Sanders. It would have been much... you switch Biden for Bernie, and all of a sudden Trump's strategy makes a hell of a lot more sense, at least in terms of rhetoric. And this was during the Supreme Court section, which I actually think Trump won definitively. Like, it wasn't even up for any real debate. And here's why. One, Trump quoted Ginsburg on whether or not to fill the seat. Because Ginsburg said, the president is elected for 4-year terms. Not 3, not 2. And the Senate is elected for, their specific term. And their duties do not end just because it is an election year. Ouch. Now, yes, it was Ginsburg's final wishes not to have her seat filled until after the election. Well, actually, until the next president is seated, but, politics. But in all seriousness, using her past words, it is a little bit silly that she flip-flopped with her final wishes. But, oh well, that happened. Shenanigans breed shenanigans. Somebody play that South Park clip of Eric Cartman calling shenanigans. Trump was also correct regarding military health care after the ACA, because believe it or not, I have some experience regarding military care, and most hospitals dropped TRICARE, which is the insurer for the U.S. military. A lot of hospitals dropped TRICARE after the ACA passed. And for a decent amount of the military population, that actually really did hurt them because they either had to switch doctors or get secondary insurance or figure out other ways to pay medical bills. So, yeah. Now, Biden tried to frame any healthcare discussion during the Supreme Court section on COVID because that's a winning issue for Biden. I'm going to be flat out honest here. The public trusts Biden significantly more than they trust Trump on COVID. It's just a thing. And I'm just using it instead of trying to dodge YouTube's algorithm because YouTube can go fuck itself. At first, I thought Trump talking over Wallace was not good. I still don't think it's great. But Trump was really able to use his ability to create crosstalk to reframe everything or force discussion away from bad issues on him and into more productive areas for him, or to reframe the debate, or to make it hard to hear any criticism of his policy or policies. So, from a strategy point, while it definitely sounds bad stylistically and tone-wise, in terms of substance, it it kind of shields him from some criticism on some of his record. So I'm not going to say it's a good strategy, but it's interesting at the very least. Now, Biden said that, and Chris Wallace actually said that Trump's executive orders were for show and not going to change anything. But the thing is, if executive orders are all for show and don't actually do anything, then why did the Republicans hate Obama for using them so much? Executive orders actually can be extremely powerful when done correctly. And the prescription drug cost limit executive order, as well as I forget what the other one was regarding some other stuff. And Trump really tried to. He said that quite a few times that he had done more in 47 months in office than Biden had done in 47 years. Biden talks about a public option and describes it as automatic enrollment, which isn't actually an option. Because it requires you to opt out rather than opt in. If it required you to opt into it, yes, that would be an option. Now, Biden does say that his plan would be specifically for people who are eligible for Medicaid. Okay, I mean, still, isn't that... I mean, is that really going to change anything? Other than, I actually don't know what that changes. I'm a little bit ashamed to say because I can't tell the difference between Medicaid and a public option for people who are eligible for Medicaid. That seems like the most bland, half-hearted attempt to reach the left halfway. I mean, at least Buttigieg said that, yeah, it'd be Medicare for all who want it. Meaning, if you were in the middle class or even upper class and you wanted the public option, you could take it. Whereas Biden said it would only be for those eligible for Medicaid. I mean, that seems a little bit... But I don't consider anything that's an automatic enrollment to be an option. It's closer to a mandate that you can opt out of, which you could say, well, it's just an option, but you're automatically put into the option. You can tell them later if you don't actually want to be there. I see it differently because how many people are actually going to opt out? Genuine question. And I mention a lot about the crosstalk. Also, Trump's... Oh, yeah, that was what the other executive order that Trump signed was a protection of care for those with pre-existing conditions. From what I've read, it actually would do something. So when Joe Biden says it wouldn't, it's useless and just all for show. Well, sorry, Joe, that's not true. The way I understand the language in it. Trump is trying to bully... I did notice that Trump was trying to bully Biden. And the most important question, this is why I don't think any reasonable person should consider Joe Biden the winner of the Supreme Court section, and why every reasonable person should say that Joe lost the Supreme Court section, was he dodged the question about court packing. This is in my opinion, this is a no-lose situation for Biden if he says, no, I'm not in favor of court packing. Number one, it takes away the biggest arguments vulnerable Senate Republicans have for campaigning both for Trump as well as for their own seats. Two, it takes away one of the biggest arguments that the Trump campaign has against Biden. And number three, it helps Biden portray himself as a moderate. By dodging the question, he appears complicit through omission in the talk from Democratic Senators Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris, in court packing talk, as well as a few House Democrats, and making it seem like they want to turn the Supreme Court into a political institution, where if the Supreme Court rules in a way that the Oval Office sees as incorrect, all you have to do is get Congress to add new seats to the court, and the president gets to fill them. I think court packing is wholeheartedly detrimental to anything reasonable. I'm more scared of court packing than I am of any election shenanigans, because I generally trust the Supreme Court, whether or not I agree with the majority opinion. I generally trust that they at least made an effort to read the law as it is written and to make a ruling based purely on the constitutionality of a law, not their own personal opinions. In addition, the Supreme Court is extremely well trusted, and threatening to change it when they're the only branch of government that has above water approval ratings, so much so, and it's not just slightly above water, it's around 60% to 2/3 approval. So yeah, it's not slight approval. No, people overwhelmingly support the Supreme Court. And I don't think that's going to change even with Amy Coney Barrett. And Biden responds to Trump saying that Biden would pack the court by saying, would you shut up? Now, some may argue that is a emphatic no, that Biden wouldn't pack the court, but the reality is that was more of a Donald, please shut up while I am talking. Or a, oh, for God's sakes, be quiet, I'm tired of hearing you talk. It was more of an annoyance shut up than a, I'm not going to do that, shut up. Also, it was kind of after that whole court packing question thing, but sort of. I was having to write extremely quickly. Some of this is hardly legible if I'm 100% honest. Yeah, Biden trying to be empathetic was certainly his best play, in my opinion. It's what won Bill Clinton the debates in '92. So, certainly, certainly very good. That said, I did notice, I'm not going to call it a gaffe, but it was a little bit strange to hear him say this. Should get in your golf course in the Oval Office. I think what he was trying to say should be get off your golf course and into the Oval Office. Also, Trump is correct on one part of the COVID issue that he was the first person calling for shutdowns to highly infected areas. And he rightfully claims that the Democrats attacked him for it and called him a racist xenophobe and a bigot and all sorts of other horrible things for even suggesting that we shut down travel from these infected areas. I'm not going to say what that should tell you, but, let's give it a break. And here's the thing, Trump even mentioned this whole thing in his State of the Union address, which happened during, I think, the best month of his presidency, at least according to polling, as well as the complete debacle of the Iowa caucuses. And Trump was certainly trying to fight back on what was probably his weakest issue. Unfortunately, it's probably going to wind up being the top issue of this campaign. So he needs to fight hard on it. And I even said I don't think it'll work. Trump did bring up swine flu. I'm not sure how that one will stick. They debated about the vaccine, when it would be available. I'm not sure. Wallace did kind of ask Biden if he thought that some of the Democrats calling of Trump a liar might be playing into some people's worries or reluctance to get a COVID vaccine if one is developed fair and generally available soon, because of all the stuff that Trump says and all the fear, and Biden kind of tries to deflect. Trump tried to hammer Biden for saying that he went to a university that he never attended, according to the university Biden said he attended. Now, Trump did, during this whole thing, try and refocus on the economy, and Trump was correct in that the shutdowns weren't just bad for the economy, they weren't very good for most people. Obesity certainly increased. I guarantee you most people gained a not insignificant amount of weight during the lockdown. Alcoholism spiked. I haven't read anything to suggest that it didn't. I mean, what are you going to do if you're pent up, constantly? You're going to sit around, watch YouTube, read books. You're not going to be going out exercising, eating healthy. You're going to drink. You're going to be doing all sorts of other things. He was correct that depression increased, suicide rates increased. People need social and human interaction. It's not just about going out to work or anything like that. People are social creatures, whether or not we want to admit it or not. And even for those of us who are introverts, we do need social interaction, even if we it's just how much and what that social interaction does to us afterwards. But we do need it, and the shutdowns really, really put a stress on all of that. I'm not going to say, whether or not it was right to shut everything down. That's for history and posterity to decide. But I will say that there were negatives. It wasn't just to the economy. There was actually human negatives. And by the way, I really didn't like it whenever Biden went into a hushed tone. I did some debates, in public speaking courses and, mock debates in high school, all sorts of other things. I have tried it before, and it doesn't work. It's terrible. It doesn't win over anyone. And I don't know how Biden thought it was a good idea to go there. Trump did hit on Biden for Biden's lack of enthusiasm when Chris Wallace said, your style of campaigning during this uncertain time is indicative. Trump holds massive rallies, Biden holds small gatherings, and Trump basically said because he can't gather enough support to hold a massive rally. Okay, interesting. But yeah, no, COVID is a weakness. The economy was very good for Trump, and Trump makes a very good case on the V-shaped recovery. And the employment rebound has been shocking, to say the least. It's far exceeded any sort of expectations. I think most economists said this was going to be kind of a checkmark shaped recovery, which I think is the most reasonable course of action to take. So basically, I'm going to go ahead and explain this. A V-shaped recovery basically means you have the spike, you have the crash, and then you have a spike right afterwards, and it's basically, it was just a panic, right? A check mark is, it looks like a check mark, or I guess I should go this way since you're watching the other direction, where the crash happens and then the recovery happens over time. And this is what happens most crashes, is you get a checkmark shaped recovery. Biden's argument is that it's a K-shaped recovery, where you get, your crash and then and that basically indicates that markets and speculation and other activities that aren't really, that are just more gambling on the strength of the economy or lack thereof, is doing better right now than actual economic data such as inflation, employment, cost of goods, real wages, stuff like that, labor force participation. And from what I've observed, no, we're getting something in between a check mark and a V, from what I can tell. And I'm ignoring the stock market completely when I look at this, purely based off the number, labor force participation, unemployment figures, inflation, all the other stuff, GDP growth, all that. I did notice that Biden, he kind of was stuttering a little bit and sometimes tripping over his own words. And it was throughout, where it sounded like he was trying to say one thing or another, and then it kind of became clear when he finished his sentence. and I noticed Biden was kind of acting almost as if he had already won the election at times, which I think is a bit arrogant. Now, that's not to say confidence is bad. Confidence is very good. You need to be very confident when you are debating, but not arrogant. There was also some mixed messaging. Biden saying that you can't open when he said that he wanted businesses to reopen. I think he tried to make that a little bit more clear, where he said, well, he wanted to reopen in a smart way, gradually, more, all that. But I don't think people are going to be in favor of a second lockdown or slowing down reopening, especially in states where they've already fully reopened or never locked down to begin with, like South Dakota. The other thing Trump is right about on the economy, and this was in the economy section, is that people, especially parents, want schools and businesses open. They want schools open so that they can go back to work. They want businesses open so that they can go back to work, so that they can feed their kids. And they want schools open because they want their kids to have an education. Private schools are seeing their enrollment figures spike significantly. That should tell you everything you need to know about whether or not parents think their kids should be going to school or staying at home, and whether or not they're willing to take the risk of catching this disease, or whether they want to be as safe as possible, just so that their kids can have an education and they can go back to work. And then Trump made the most... I never thought I would hear college football brought up in a presidential debate, but Trump said he brought back college football. And with regards to Big Ten, he's not entirely wrong. Then there's the tax debate where Trump says he paid more, $38 million one year and $20 million the next, or $28 million and $30 million. I lost track, yeah. Biden said, no, that's just not right, and all that. The New York Times, I think in 2016 and 2017, released a report saying that Trump paid millions in taxes over both of those years. Just not, they just didn't list exactly what it was from. That $750 may legit be just his income tax, but that ignores his capital gains tax, property tax, luxury taxes, etc. I find it more likely than not that he probably did pay in the millions of dollar range when it comes to his taxes. That said, if he really did pay $750, I'm not sure I care. I'm really not. I'd love it if everybody paid nothing. But again, my opinion is a little bit outside of the norm here in the States. I think the economy was definitely one where Trump won. From what I've seen, Trump's tax cuts they're not unpopular, they're not popular. So I'm not sure if saying that you're going to repeal them is a good idea, but it's not a bad idea, at least in terms of shoring up your base. I will say that Biden's line of the art of the steal, that was a good one-liner. Some stuff going on about Hunter Biden and all that stuff. Trump managed to somehow reframe the race relations debate to be about law enforcement, and then mentioned Biden's authoring of the 94 crime bill, and then actually promoted his criminal justice reform, saying, we've let nonviolent offenders out. But then he tries to go the other way on law enforcement and say that he's the law and order candidate while Biden wants to defund the police, when the 94 crime bill was kind of it was a little bit harsh, let's be honest here, when it came to law enforcement. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, and of course Biden called Trump a racist on stage. He didn't just allude to it or anything. He just straight up said Trump is a racist. I'm not sure Biden is the one to make that message, considering that he said that he didn't want his kids growing up in a racial jungle. He was, not in favor of integration of schools, and he was against busing. Yeah, and of course the 94 crime bill has been devastating to African Americans. So I don't think Biden is the right messenger of the Trump is a racist message, at least from the Democratic perspective. I thought that was a bit interesting. I'm just trying to fast forward. I thought that Biden's law and order with justice was actually a good line. Whether or not that plays out is, yeah. But the interesting thing is that Trump managed to get off the race issue very quickly. I was genuinely shocked at how quickly he turned it around. The one thing I think Trump should have said, and that was a big missed opportunity, was labeling the Ku Klux Klan as terrorists in a speech in Atlanta, and he may have done it through executive order as well. And I'm actually shocked that it hadn't already been done. But yeah. And then climate change. I thought Trump's response was meh on the issue. Not going to help him, not going to hurt him, regardless of what Biden said. And I think I was correct on that. Trump brings up a reduction in price in vehicles, which is actually an interesting argument to make, because as time has gone on, mileage in vehicles has improved just as a nature of technological improvement. So if you're driving a 20-year-old car and you can't afford to get a new car which gets much better mileage and has lower emissions, well, you're still going to drive that 20-year-old car. But then all of a sudden, if you can afford that new car, you're going to get it. Or maybe if you think about it, you might get it. But if you trade in that old car for the new car, and enough people do that because of the reduction in price, which, following the logic of the laws of supply and demand, should happen, whether or not it's the elasticity of that good is going to make it effectual is a different question. The utility certainly is decent, but that's some advanced economic concepts. But anyway, the laws of supply and demand say that if new vehicles decrease in prices, more people are going to get them, and a lot of people are going to trade in their old cars to do so, and that's going to, on average, improve emissions as well as mileage figures. So Trump isn't wrong there. It just requires a lot of thought to understand why he's actually correct when he says more new cars, lower emissions. because you're getting the old ones off the street. It's pretty clever, actually. Biden said that we're going to be abandoning fossil fuels at some point, and that means no coal. I don't think that's going to help him in Pennsylvania. Lots of coal country in Pennsylvania. Ohio, lots of coal country in Ohio. I mean, he was never winning West Virginia anyway. West Virginia is exclusively coal country. It'll hurt him in my neck of the woods in Virginia, but overall in the state, it's not going to hurt him at all because, I mean, Nova is, that's what they want to hear. And Nova rules the state, as much as I hate it. But Pennsylvania and Ohio, that's not exactly going to help Biden. Then I thought I heard Biden say Miley standards for vehicles. I think he was trying to say mileage, and he may have said mileage, but what I heard was Miley. And Trump spent a lot of time trying to tie Biden to AOC, Bernie, Ilhan Omar, and the Green New Deal when it came to climate change, which Trump said would cost obscene amounts of money. I think he said $100 trillion or something like that. And then Biden said the Green New Deal will pay for itself. And then he immediately backtracked when he realized what he had said. And said, no, I don't support it. Because even Chris Wallace caught it and said, wait a second, do you support the Green New Deal? And at that point, Biden was like, no. I don't think Biden actually supports it, but he might be crazy enough to sign it if it lands on his desk. Because if he can forget in the heat of a debate that he doesn't support it and actually defends a policy he doesn't support, yeah, if it lands on his desk, he'll sign it. I genuinely believe that. Just because of that comment right there. I'm not going to say Freudian slip. I'm not going to say he said the quiet part out loud because I think he just made a mistake. But if the Trump campaign knows what it's doing, it'll play that clip in every single ad because Green New Deal actually isn't all that popular in the United States, especially in swing states that both campaigns need to win. Trump mentioned some actual cases of shenanigans with ballots that, yes, have been reported by certain groups in the media, including a case where addresses in Virginia were sent 2 ballots to the same person. It was like 1,000, which is not going to be enough to flip anything in Virginia, but it was specifically in Democratic controlled, heavily Democratic areas that these extra ballots were sent. Now Virginia has said, oh no, if we get 2 ballots from one person, we're only going to count 1. But what if the votes differ? Which ballot are you going to count? Are you going to count the first one you receive or the last one you receive? Are you going to count the one that's favorable to you? Because how are you going to know which was the first one and the last one that you received? Anyway, and of course that case where there was a ton of ballots just thrown in a dumpster that actually had names on them, had votes filled out. Biden doesn't want the court to get involved, period. Maybe he's afraid that it'll rule against him. I don't know. But I actually don't think that's a bad statement for him to make because I don't think any of us truly should want the court to get involved. I would hope everybody wants the election to be decided as quickly, as fairly as possible, and with no ambiguity. I genuinely hope that. In the end, I think this was a wash. I thought there were segments Trump won on substance. There were sections Biden certainly won on substance. And at the end of the day, I consider it mostly a wash because, to be honest, both candidates really didn't do anything other than what I expected them to do. And supporters for both candidates are going to say that their candidate won, and moderates are kind of saying what I was saying, which was that it was an unmitigated shit show and that they don't want to make the choice between these two. Whether or not they stay undecided or go third party or just stay home or whether or not they break for one of the two candidates is still left to be decided. But I genuinely don't think opinions will be changed on this because of this debate. I've long since ruled that out. Anyway, I've rambled on for far long enough. If you made it through to the end of this video, a like, comment, and subscription would greatly be appreciated. And I thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Have a very nice evening, and see you next time. Bye-bye.